Studies Section 2, Communication and the Idea of Human Society. Introduction. In this lecture, we will further clarify the meaning of human communication. This will then lead us to the analysis of the relationship between communication as a specific human creation and the society as another unique human creation. What is it about human communication that makes the human society possible? Learning outcomes for study section 2. When you have studied this section, you should be able to explain the meaning of communication as a human fabrication, identify the relationship between communication and the evolution of human society, explain how the human society is practically impossible without communication. Communication as a human fabrication. Let us begin this lecture by considering one of the wonders of nature, the social animals, bees, termites, ants. These social animals have fascinated us simply because of what we consider to be their orderly and near human way of life. You watch them go about their daily business of survival in much the same way we do. They mate, collect, store, build, fight intruders, protect their territory, and so on. We say they are social because of the feature of organization and relationship we perceive in their midst. What is communication? Definition of communication. Communication is a conscious or unconscious, intentional or unintentional process of imparting an interchange of thought, opinions, and information by speech, writings, or signs. Communication is a social attribute. However, to be social is a uniquely human characteristic that goes beyond the capacity to manage interaction. The word social comes from the Latin socialis and the root socios, which translates as companion. From this, we can begin to compare the bee society or the ant society with the human society. In the first place, while association in the animal society is characterized by mindlessness and mechanical relationship, the human society purposive. It will not do to say that an ant is also purposive because it pursues a particular act. Purpose in this sense relates to the behavior that is motivated by a system of goals, values, and objectives. This tells us that the idea of society goes beyond the mere idea of living together. What differentiates the human behavior from the animals? The human behavior is purposeful while that of animals is mechanical. What makes a society? The first characteristic of a society is that it is guided by social action. According to Michael Ryan, in the Encyclopedia of Social Theory, a social action occurs when thought processes intervene between a stimulus, an actor, and their subsequent response. In other words, it is a process whereby an individual attaches a subjective meaning to his or her action. 2005, 714. This thoughtfulness is contrasted to a mechanical and reactive behavior involving responding to a stimulus without any thought process involved. From this point, we can begin to derive many ideas about the human society. In the first place, purposive action on the part of individuals leads to social cooperation. The human society, according to Wikipedia, refers to a group of people related to each other through persistent relations like social status, roles, and social networks, or b. a large social grouping that shares the same geographical territory and is subject to the same political authority and dominant cultural expectations. In other words, this group of people that form the society interact in a space characterized by a pattern of social relations between individuals bounded by social institutions and norms. Being dash is the main characteristic of being in a society. Sociable. Human communication. Roger Scruton defines a society as any aggregate of individual human beings who interact in a systematic way so as to determine the criteria of membership. This human grouping depends on social interaction of the individuals who are committed to living within the same geographical location and sharing the same goals and values. Social order. This, according to Spencer Cahill, social interaction is simply the process through which two or more social actors reciprocally influence one another's action. 2005 247. It should be obvious by now the kind of role that human communication will play in this interactive arrangement. How is it possible, for instance, that two cars coming on opposite sides of the road would not consistently hit each other? Or that a man would not always grab a girl because he feels like having sex? In other words, what is it about our social interaction that makes social order possible? This is made possible in a context in which the actions of individuals are made understandable to other individuals. And this is done when those actions are brought under specific rules of conduct mutually understood by everybody concerned. Thus, when two car drivers are approaching each other, they avoid a head-on collision because both understand the rules of driving. Human language, therefore, serves as the channel through which the meaning of social conduct and behavior are passed from one individual and group to other. The preceding analysis reveals that communication is critical to the survival of human society. In the essay, Language and the Destiny of Man, Chinua Achebe makes the case that language was so important in the evolution of man and the society that both would have been overcome by violence and bestiality had language not aided human communication. 1990-30. The significance of language. Language as communication, according to Chinua Achebe, became man's instrument for challenging the perilous fate imposed by nature. If you doubt this, assume that we all in the society cannot talk. Is sight an example? Imagine, before the advent of language, that a man enters a cave without the slightest clue that someone else was there already. The landlord was just consuming a meal. What do you think would happen? The first hint, and maybe the last, the newcomer would likely be a huge stone hurled at his head. Now, imagine that the landlord possesses the capacity to speak and communicate. Rather than throwing the stone to warn the intruder about his presence, he could simply shout, "Get out of here, you fool!" That would have been sufficient to avert the violent confrontation. Thus, the point of Achebe is that without the intervention of language, the evolution of the human society would not have become possible, since the attempt would have dissolved in violence. Another trivial example cited by Achebe is the trouble that parents go through over a crying baby that makes them wonder the following. A. Is it food she or he wants? B. Is she or he uncomfortable? C. Has something beaten him or her? D. Does she or he want to sleep? E. What does she or he want? All the mother could hope to do is attempt a trial and error procedure in the hope of hitting the cause of the strident cry. IBID 31. Assume, however, that the baby has the power of speech. The example of the child without the capacity for speech again illustrates another important element in communication. The communication process serves as a significant factor that cements the various elements of the society. The words community and communication share the same root meaning, which derives from the Latin word communis or common. This implies that communication within a society exists on the basis of common or shared values which the society holds. The community exists on the basis of the commonalities humans share together. Communication becomes possible in the first place because of these commonalities. When a child is born into a community, she or he is eventually socialized into these shared values and meanings that make understanding ultimately possible. Element of language as propounded by Ngugiwa Thiong. Ngugiwa Thiong divided language as communication into three categories. These categories are equally important in facilitating the survival of the human society, and they go thus. 1. The first one is what Karl Marx calls the language of real life. This involves the relationship of communication people enter into in the process of wresting survival from nature. In other words, the language of real life derives from the evolution of a human society and the practical requirements necessary for cooperation in the production of basic needs of the society, and it produces the means of survival through practical confrontation with nature. There is the need to cooperate, and to cooperate effectively, human beings needed to fabricate a mode of communication that expresses the relationship between them. Ngugi, 1987, 13. 2. The second element of language as communication is speech. This is very crucial to the language of real life because it serves as the verbal signpost that both reflect and aid communication of the relation established between human beings in the production of their means of life. Ngugi, 1987, 14. In other words, it is a speech as a system of verbal signs and symbols that put form to the relation of production the people have established to consolidate their survival. This element of speech mediates between an individual and others. 3. The last element of language as communication is the written signs. Again, this element imitates communication as speech. This is a much more recent development in the history of man and played a less significant role in human survival compared with communication with hand and communication with speech. Language is a representation of sounds with visual symbols. IBID. Dash is the verbal signpost that both reflects and aid good communication. A. Society. B. Communication. C. Language. C. Language. It aids communication faster. The role of communication. The function of facilitating the transactions of society through the transmission of messages and ideas which communication makes possible is not only limited to the confines of the society. Communication not only ensures that what goes on in the community can easily be ascertained, understood, and evaluated by all. Achebe, 1990-33. But it is also valuable across societies and across generations. Table 2.1. Societies. Communication function. 1. In a particular society, Communication mediates between conflicting interests, values, preferences, and so on. This could be, for instance, between two conflicting religious claims or two cultural or ethnic interests. Such conflicting claims and interests may become unstable in the absence of communication. 2. Across societies. Communication mediates between two different societies and their different worldviews or perspectives. If a society has an intolerant view about other societies, then it becomes impossible to avoid conflict between those two societies. 3. Across generations. Communication facilitates the transfer of values, traditions, customs, and cultures from one generation to the other. Thus, communication becomes an all-embracing and all-pervasive phenomenon. It is all-embracing because it is intrinsic to all human endeavors, and it is all-pervasive because it is involved in all human activities. This phenomenon can, however, be hijacked if certain values that makes it effective are neglected. Effects of good communication. For a society to function well, there is need for good communication. Communication is measured, valid, and estimable when it has the features mentioned below. The value of clarity. This involves communicating one's ideas and messages in a manner that makes them easy for comprehension. In other words, the value of clarity requires that one says what one means and mean what one says. This is possible if a person is careful about the choice of words she or he wishes to use. It also involves being careful about the economy of words. This principle also requires that one shouldn't use too many words where just a few will suffice. Too many words or a bad choice of concept will only complicate the meaning of what a person intends to say. Consider a statement like dancing and dancing when the song, which you do not even understand and which is unrhymed, is already ended, and laughing away at the infinitude of human suffering will lead in the eternal temporal scale to no fulfilling existential return. The value of truthfulness. This factor ensures that when you communicate, you earn the trust of people who take your word for what it is. This implies that the person communicating should attempt to stay with the reality as much as possible. If trust is lost in communication, then there is no way the message transfer can be effective. If a person says, "Of course, it is raining, but the sun is shining," the communication process has been short-circuited. The value of logicality. In communicating, the person sending the message must also ensure that his or her message follows the minimum requirement of coherence, consistency, and rationality. Inconsistent or contradictory messages will not ensure effective communication. For instance, if a person says to you, "I am on my way to the United States, but I'll see you in 10 minutes," how will you react to that message? The value of charity. This value insists that in any communication process, those involved must assume that the people they are communicating with are as human as we are. Being charitable, that is, implies that we recognize the humanity in the others we are communicating with. There is an element of the golden rule involved here. Treat others the way you also want to be treated. Communication is not achieved if a sender assumes less about the humanity of the other person. For instance, one cannot hope to communicate meaningfully with an animal the same way one communicates with a human person. The value of tolerance. This value is already assumed by the value of charity. This value recognizes first that between the person sending a message and the other receiving it, there is a whole lot of differences. Communication cannot start, however, if these differences are not surmounted. Transcending such differences requires that those involved in the communication process are civilized. To illustrate this, one can refer to the stereotyping which characterizes the human society. Stereotyping involves reducing a person or a particular ethnic culture to an oversimplified category. Thus, all Igbos are seen as cheats, all Hausas are dirty and savage, all Yoruba are extravagant, and so on. Communicating with this mindset becomes impossible. Finally, there are some other factors that could hinder effective communication. They are listed in the diagram below. Power, wealth, idle dogmatism. Figure 2.2, Factors of Bad Communication. Source, Schulz-Portas Incorporation. A. Power. It essentially serves as a means for moderating the base human instinct, promoting the values conducive to human progress. Power, in other words, moderates peace in the human society. On the other hand, power could also serve as an agent of intolerance and subjection that inhibit effective communication. B. Wealth. Ensures that money and valuables are necessary means to the end of happiness and fulfillment. Like power, this could also be employed toward an uncharitable and uncivilized greed that hinders cooperation and progress among people. C. Dogmatism. Holding tenaciously to one's point of view without attempting to see the sense in others' point ensures that communication does not even take off. Dogmatism, for example, precludes the use of rational arguments since the dogmatic person is unwilling to consider any evidence against his or her perspective. Mention 3 values of good communication. A. Value of logicality. B. Value of truthfulness. C. Value of clarity. Summary for Study Section 2. In this study section, you have learned that 1. Communication and its process is implicated in the evolution of the human society. 2. Society came into existence on the basis of social interaction and the existence of those common values and ideas and institutions. 3. These common values not only developed as a result of the communicating effort of human beings relating together, they also facilitate further communication. This implies that communication is both all-embracing and all-pervasive. It is intrinsic to the entire idea of the human society. 4. Communication and community even share the same etymological root in the Latin word communis, meaning common. We then went on to analyze those factors and values that could jumpstart or hinder effective communication, which ensures adequate understanding and rapport in the society. 5. In the absence of these values, there is the likelihood that the human society may degenerate into violence. These values include of clarity, the value of truthfulness, the value of charity, the value of tolerance, and the value of logicality. This is the end of Study Section 2. Thanks for listening.